Life Stories brings you tales of courage, love, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Today's story begins with a quiet evening walk that quickly spirals into an unexpected confrontation. When a couple and their two tiny dogs cross paths with a pair of menacing bikers. What starts as harassment turns into a powerful lesson about standing up for what matters most. Join us as we follow their journey through fear, resolve, and surprising connections. Don't miss out on today's heartwarming and inspiring tale. Subscribe to Life Stories to start this incredible journey with us. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the quiet streets of Santa Monica. It was one of those perfect moments where the air was just crisp enough to keep you comfortable, yet warm enough to make you want to linger outside. Mark Evans adjusted his grey hoodie, pulling it up just a little more, hoping to avoid unnecessary attention. His wife, Rachel, walked beside him, holding the leashes of their two miniature dachshunds, Daisy and Maximum. Their tiny legs trotted enthusiastically on the pavement, the rhythmic clicking of their nails adding a delightful soundtrack to their otherwise calm walk. Mark glanced at Rachel with a hint of hesitation. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. "All of us going out like this, especially with the dogs?" Rachel sighed, her patience as steady as ever. "Mark, we've talked about this. Daisy has been howling for hours. And now Max is picking up on her anxiety. It's all because that silly toy of theirs stopped working. The batteries died. Remember?" Mark chuckled softly, though his brow remained furrowed. "Yeah, I remember. But couldn't we have just ordered the batteries online? Dealing with Daisy's howls for a few days is better than attracting attention out here." Rachel shot him a knowing look. "You know how she gets, Mark. And Max. He mirrors everything she does. That toy is the only thing that keeps them calm when they're stressed. Besides," she added, gesturing to their casual attire, "who's going to recognize us like this? It's just a quick walk to the gas station. 3 blocks there and back. We'll be fine." Mark sighed, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Rachel had a way of grounding him, of reminding him that sometimes the simplest solution was the best one. "All right," he conceded, though his eyes scanned their quiet surroundings. "But let's make it quick." "Yeah." Rachel smiled, her arm brushing against his as they walked. "It's a beautiful evening, Mark. The dogs could use the fresh air. And who knows? We might even catch a lovely sunset on the way back." The thought of a peaceful evening walk seemed to lighten Mark's mood. He glanced down at Daisy and Maximum, who were eagerly sniffing every bush and lamppost along the way. Their excitement was contagious, and Mark found himself smiling despite his earlier reservations. "You know," he mused, "I never thought I'd be the type to own small dogs. Always saw myself with something bigger, more intimidating." Rachel laughed softly. "And yet here you are, completely wrapped around the paws of 2 tiny dachshunds. Admit it. They've charmed you." Mark couldn't help but chuckle. "They do have their moments. Though I'm not sure how intimidating they'd be if we ever needed guard dogs." "Oh, don't underestimate them," Rachel replied with a grin. "Remember when the delivery guy came last week? Daisy barked so fiercely. You'd think we had a Rottweiler." Mark shook his head at the memory, his smile widening. "True. Nearly gave the poor guy a heart attack." As they turned the corner, the gas station came into view, its fluorescent lights flickering faintly in the growing dusk. Mark's unease returned, his protective instincts sharpening as his eyes scanned the area. The neighborhood was usually peaceful, but the world had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. "Let's make this quick," he murmured, his tone soft but firm. Rachel squeezed his arm reassuringly. "It's fine, Mark. We're almost there. Just grab the batteries, and we'll be home before you know it." The street remained quiet as they approached, the low hum of distant traffic their only accompaniment. The tranquility, however, was abruptly shattered by the roar of 2 Harley motorcycles thundering past. The noise was deafening, the fumes lingering in the air long after the bikes had disappeared around the corner. Mark's jaw tightened as he turned to look at Rachel, whose grip on the leashes had instinctively tightened. Before they could say anything, the motorcycles circled back. The riders, two burly men in leather jackets, slowed down as they passed. One of them, a man with a thick beard and an air of arrogance, shouted over the engine's rumble, "Hey! Those mop dogs look like they belong in a janitor's closet." The insult hung in the air, sharp and grating. Mark's hands clenched into fists, his earlier relaxation evaporating in an instant. He shot a warning glare at the retreating bikers, his voice low and controlled. Unbelievable. Rachel's eyes reflected her concern as she glanced at him. "Mark, maybe we should head back. You were right. Bringing the dogs might have been a bad idea." Mark hesitated, his protective instincts at war with his desire to avoid confrontation. He looked down at Daisy and Maximum, who remained blissfully unaware of the tension, their tails wagging happily. After a moment, he shook his head. "No. We're already here. Let's just grab what we need and go." Rachel nodded, though the unease in her eyes remained. "All right. But let's keep moving." As they continued toward the gas station, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the peace of their quiet evening had been irrevocably disturbed. He glanced at Rachel, her determined stride and steady presence reminding him why they were out here in the first place. This was about more than just batteries, it was about love, responsibility, and the small sacrifices we make for those we care about. For Daisy and Maximum, their family. Little did Mark know, the events of the evening were only beginning to unfold, and the lessons they would learn would go far beyond this simple walk. The gas station loomed closer as Mark and Rachel walked in silence, the quiet between them underscored by the rhythmic clicking of Daisy and Max's tiny nails on the pavement. The earlier encounter with the bikers still lingered in Mark's mind, his protective instincts keeping him on high alert. Rachel, sensing his tension, stayed close to him, her hand brushing against his arm as if to ground them both. The air was still, almost unnaturally so. As they rounded the final corner, the peacefulness of the late afternoon was broken only by the occasional honk of a distant car or the muffled bark of a dog from a nearby yard. For a brief moment, Mark allowed himself to relax, focusing on the warmth of Rachel's presence beside him and the cheerful energy of their little dogs. But as they approached the gas station, Rachel suddenly stopped, her sharp intake of breath pulling Mark from his thoughts. "Mark," she whispered, her voice tinged with worry. She gestured toward the parking lot, where two motorcycles were parked near the entrance, their shiny chrome frames catching the fading sunlight. The same bikers from earlier leaned casually against their bikes, their loud laughter cutting through the stillness of the evening. Mark's jaw tightened as he followed her gaze. His initial instinct was to turn back, but then he saw the two men harassing an elderly woman who was clutching the leash of a small dog. The bikers laughed cruelly, towering over the woman as she tried to edge away from them. Mark felt a surge of anger, his hands balling into fists. He couldn't walk away, not now. "Stay behind me," Mark said firmly, his voice low but commanding. He stepped in front of Rachel, positioning himself between her and the bikers. Daisy and Maximum, sensing the shift in his demeanor, pressed closer to his legs, their earlier excitement replaced by quiet vigilance. As they moved closer, the burly man with the thick beard, Hank, noticed them and straightened, a smug grin spreading across his face. "Well, look who it is," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "The janitor with his mop dogs. What brings you back here? Lost your way?" The other biker, Duke, chuckled and added, "Or maybe they're here for the dogfight tomorrow. Can't wait to see those sausages run for their lives." Rachel's grip on the leashes tightened, her knuckles white as she fought to keep her composure. Mark, however, didn't flinch. He met Hank's gaze, his voice calm but firm. "Let her go," he said, nodding toward the elderly woman. "Now, Hank's grin faltered for a moment. But he quickly regained his swagger, stepping forward to block Mark's path. "And what are you gonna do if I don't? Call the cops? Or maybe you'll sick your little mop dogs on me?" Mark didn't answer. Instead, he slowly pulled back his hoodie, revealing his face fully for the first time. Recognition flickered in Hank's eyes, followed by a mix of surprise and unease. Duke's laughter faded as he elbowed his companion. "Wait a second," Duke muttered. "That's Mark Evans. You know, from the movies." The tension hung thick in the air as the bikers exchanged uncertain glances. Mark took a step closer, his presence commanding. "I don't care who you think you are," he said quietly, his voice carrying an edge of steel. "But if you lay a hand on anyone else or their dog, you'll regret it." For a moment, no one moved. The bikers, caught between their bravado and the sudden realization of who they were dealing with, hesitated. Then, with a grumble, Hank stepped back, releasing the elderly woman. She quickly gathered her dog and hurried away, her grateful glance at Mark saying more than words ever could. Rachel exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her hand brushing against Mark's arm as if to steady herself. But the bikers weren't finished. Hank's eyes narrowed, his earlier unease replaced by anger. "You think you can just walk in here and tell us what to do?" he growled. "You've got no idea who you're messing with." Mark didn't respond. He simply turned to Rachel, his expression calm but resolute. "Let's get what we came for and leave," he said, guiding her toward the gas station entrance. The bikers muttered angrily behind them, but they didn't follow. Inside the store, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly, a stark contrast to the tension outside. Rachel picked up a pack of batteries while Mark stayed close, his eyes scanning the parking lot through the glass windows. "Mark," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "what if they don't let this go?" Mark placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his voice steady. "Let them try. We'll be ready." As they approached the counter, the young cashier glanced nervously toward the bikers outside. "They've been hanging around here for weeks," he said quietly, ringing up their purchase, causing all sorts of trouble. "Be careful when you leave." Mark nodded, his grip tightening on the bag of batteries. "We'll be fine," he said, though his mind was already turning over the next steps. Whatever the bikers had planned, Mark knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. Not yet. As Mark and Rachel stepped out of the gas station, the weight of the evening seemed to press down heavier than ever. The sun had dipped lower, casting the parking lot in a mix of dim golden light and growing shadows. Mark's hand instinctively tightened around the bag of batteries as his eyes scanned the area. The two motorcycles were still parked where they'd left them, and their riders, Hank and Duke, were now leaning against the gas pumps, watching them with predatory smirks. "Mark," Rachel murmured, her voice barely audible, "maybe we should go a different way. We don't need to pass them." Mark glanced down at her, his expression softening momentarily. He knew she was worried, and for good reason. But there was a principle at play here, one that he couldn't ignore. Turning back or taking a different route felt too much like giving in to the intimidation these men thrived on. He shook his head gently. "No. We'll walk the way we came. Just stay close to me." Daisy and Maximum, oblivious to the tension in the air, trotted alongside them, their tails wagging. Mark looked at them and felt a flicker of warmth. This was why they were doing this. This wasn't just a walk to the gas station for batteries. This was about protecting the sense of peace and normalcy that Rachel and their little dogs deserved. As they moved toward the sidewalk, Hank stepped forward, blocking their path. His smirk widened into a sneer as he looked down at Daisy and Maximum. "What's the hurry, Mop Boy?" he said, his voice thick with mockery. "You didn't think we were done with you, did you?" Mark kept his expression neutral, though his body was tense. "Ready." He gently guided Rachel to his right side, positioning himself between her and Hank. "We've got nothing to say to you," Mark said, his voice calm but firm. "Maybe not." Duke chimed in, stepping forward to flank Hank. "But we've got plenty to say to you. You embarrassed us back there. You think just because you're some hotshot actor, you can talk to us like that?" Rachel's grip on the leashes tightened. And for a moment, Mark thought she might speak. But she held her tongue, her focus shifting to Daisy and Maximum, who had pressed closer to her legs. Mark admired her restraint, knowing how much she wanted to stand up to them but also understanding the danger in escalating things further. Hank leaned down, his eyes level with Daisy. "Cute dogs," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Bet they couldn't last 5 seconds against real ones." Mark's patience snapped. "Don't even think about it," he said, his voice cutting through the evening air like a knife. His hand shifted subtly to his pocket, where his phone was. "If you touch them, the police will hear about it. And trust me, they won't care who you are." Hank straightened, his face darkening. "Police don't scare us," he growled. But there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, one that Mark didn't miss. It was clear the bikers weren't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like him. Duke crossed his arms, leaning closer to Hank. "Maybe we're wasting our time," he muttered, though his tone was far from conciliatory. "Let's just let them go. We've got better things to do." But Hank wasn't ready to back down. He reached out as if to grab Daisy's leash, his hand moving too quickly for Mark's liking. In an instant, Mark stepped forward, his voice a low, controlled growl. "I wouldn't." The threat was implicit. And Hank froze, his hand hovering mid-air. Mark's eyes locked with his, unflinching, unyielding. For a moment, time seemed to stretch, the tension between them almost palpable. Then, slowly, Hank dropped his hand, muttering something under his breath. "You've got guts," Hank said, stepping back. "I'll give you that. But this isn't over." Mark didn't respond. Instead, he turned to Rachel, his voice soft. "Let's go." They walked past the bikers without another word, Daisy and Max trotting alongside them as if nothing had happened. Rachel's hand brushed against Mark's arm, a silent gesture of gratitude and reassurance. As they turned the corner, putting some distance between themselves and the gas station, Rachel finally spoke. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "do you think they'll follow us?" Mark shook his head, though his eyes remained watchful, scanning their surroundings. "They might try," he admitted. "But I'll be ready if they do." The sun had almost disappeared below the horizon, the streetlights flickering to life as the shadows deepened. Mark's mind raced, considering the possibilities. He wasn't just thinking about the bikers anymore. He was thinking about Rachel, about Daisy and Maximum, about the safety and peace they deserved. Whatever it took, he would make sure they were protected. This wasn't just about standing up to bullies. This was about love, about family, and about refusing to let fear dictate their lives. Mark knew one thing for sure: whatever came next, he wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. The air grew cooler as the evening deepened, and the quiet neighborhood seemed to take on an eerie quality. Mark and Rachel walked in tense silence, their earlier confidence dampened by the unsettling encounter with Hank and Duke. Daisy and Max stayed close to their feet, their usual cheerful energy replaced by a noticeable unease. It was as if they could sense the shift in the atmosphere, the unspoken tension radiating from their owners. Rachel glanced over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the darkening street. "Do you think they're still back there?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Mark didn't answer immediately. His sharp eyes had already been sweeping the area, every shadow and flicker of movement scrutinized. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "But if they are, they won't get far." Rachel bit her lip, her hand gripping the leashes tightly. She hated this, the fear, the uncertainty. It was so far removed from the peaceful life they had built together. She thought of the quiet mornings they spent with Daisy and Max curled up on their laps, the laughter-filled evenings where Mark's playful teasing lightened her heart. Those moments felt like a lifetime away now, replaced by the cold weight of reality. As they turned onto their street, Rachel allowed herself to relax slightly. Their house was just a few blocks away, its warm lights a beacon of safety in the encroaching darkness. Almost there, she said softly, more to herself than to Mark. But Mark's instincts, honed over years of action-packed movie sets and training, wouldn't let him lower his guard. He could feel it, a presence, a disturbance in the calm. His eyes darted to the corner of the street. And there they were, Hank and Duke. Their motorcycles parked under a streetlight. Their figures shrouded in shadow. They weren't hiding, they wanted to be seen. Rachel saw them too, her breath hitching. "Mark," she whispered urgently, her grip on his arm tightening. "What do we do?" Mark didn't hesitate. "We keep walking," he said firmly, his voice steady. "Stay close to me." The bikers didn't move as Mark and Rachel passed by, but their presence was oppressive. A reminder that this wasn't over. Hank's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Enjoy your evening," he drawled, his tone laced with mockery. "Don't let the bad world scare you too much." Mark didn't respond, but his jaw clenched, his steps purposeful. Rachel kept her head down, focusing on Daisy and Maximum, who trotted nervously beside her. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, every muscle in her body tense. As they approached their house, Mark finally spoke. "Once we're inside, lock the doors and windows. Don't open them for anyone unless I say so." Rachel nodded, her trust in him absolute. She didn't question his instructions or the quiet authority in his voice. Mark had always been her protector, her rock. If anyone could handle this, it was him. They reached their front door, and Rachel fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking slightly. Mark stood behind her, his body a shield between her and the world. When the door finally clicked open, they stepped inside, and Mark immediately began checking the locks and windows, his movements precise and efficient. Rachel leaned against the wall, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Daisy and Max pressed against her legs, their warm little bodies a comforting presence. "Do you think they'll come here?" she asked, her voice trembling. Mark hesitated, his gaze fixed on the darkened street outside. "Maybe," he admitted. "But if they do, I'll be ready." Rachel watched him, her heart aching with a mixture of love and fear. This was who Mark was, a man who would do anything to protect the people he cared about. But she hated that it had come to this, that their peaceful evening had turned into a battle for safety. As the minutes stretched into hours, the house settled into an uneasy stillness. Mark remained vigilant, his sharp eyes scanning the shadows beyond the windows. Rachel sat on the couch with Daisy and Max curled up beside her, their soft snores a small reminder of normalcy. "I hate this," Rachel said quietly, breaking the silence. "I hate that they can just do this, that they can make us feel unsafe in our own neighborhood." Mark turned to her, his expression softening. He crossed the room and sat beside her, his arm wrapping around her shoulders. "They don't get to win," he said firmly. "This is our home, our life, and no one gets to take that from us." Rachel leaned into him, her heart steadied by his presence. She believed him. She had to. But deep down, she knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The hours crept by, and the quiet of the house felt both comforting and suffocating. Rachel busied herself with small tasks, tidying the living room, preparing a cup of tea, anything to keep her mind from the lingering shadows of the evening's events. Mark remained near the windows, occasionally glancing out into the darkened street, his posture tense but composed. Daisy and Max alternated between their beds and following Rachel, their little eyes glancing up at her as though they could sense her unease. "Mark," Rachel said softly, setting her tea down on the table. "We should call the police. Just to report what happened. Maybe it'll make them think twice before trying anything." Mark turned from the window, his gaze steady. "I've thought about it," he admitted. but without a concrete incident. They won't do much. They'll take a report. Maybe patrol the area. But that won't stop those two from causing more trouble. And if they think we're relying on the police, it could make them bolder. Rachel sighed. Frustration mixing with fear. So what do we do? Just wait for them to come knocking? Mark shook his head. No. We're not going to wait. We're going to be proactive. She frowned. Worry flickering in her eyes. What do you mean? Mark sat beside her, taking her hands in his. His voice was calm, but there was a steely determination behind it. I'm going to the source. Those two don't operate alone. They're part of a group. A gang. And their clubhouse isn't far from here. If I can talk to their leader, I might be able to resolve this before it escalates. Rachel's eyes widened, her grip on his hands tightening. You're not serious. You can't just walk into their den. Mark. That's insane. It's calculated, he corrected gently. These kinds of groups have a hierarchy. If their leader has any sense, he won't want the trouble that Hank and Duke are bringing. I can appeal to that. Rachel shook her head, her voice trembling. And what if they don't listen? What if they see you as a threat and she broke off, unable to finish the sentence? Mark leaned closer, his eyes locking with hers. I won't let it come to that. But I can't stand by and let this go unanswered. If we don't address it now, it'll only get worse. Trust me, Rachel. I'll handle this. She searched his face, her heart aching with fear and love. Mark had always been the kind of man who took action, who faced challenges head-on. It was one of the reasons she loved him. But now, that same quality filled her with dread. Fine, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. But promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll come back. Mark cupped her face in his hands, his touch warm and steady. I promise, he said softly. Then he kissed her forehead and stood, grabbing his jacket. Lock the doors behind me. Don't open them for anyone except me. Rachel nodded, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. As Mark stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of his promise hung heavy between them. She watched through the window as he walked down the street, his figure disappearing into the shadows. Left alone, Rachel turned to Daisy and Maximum, who sat at her feet, their tails wagging faintly. It's going to be okay, she murmured, more to herself than to them. But even as she said it, she couldn't shake the gnawing worry in her chest. Underscore 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 underscore. Mark's steps were measured as he walked toward the clubhouse. The directions he'd received from the gas station cashier were clear, and it didn't take long to spot the place. The large building loomed at the end of a quiet street, its iron gate adorned with a snarling wolf insignia and the word Steel Wolves. A faint light glowed from the windows, and the low hum of voices carried through the cool night air. He paused at the gate, taking a deep breath to steady himself. This wasn't just about standing up to Hank and Duke. This was about ensuring the safety of his family. He pressed the buzzer, the sharp sound cutting through the stillness. A moment passed before a gruff voice crackled through the intercom. Who's there? It's Mark Evans, he said, his voice steady. I need to speak with your leader. There was a pause, then a note of surprise in the voice. The actor. Hold on. The gate creaked open, and Mark stepped through, his senses on high alert. He could see movement through the windows of the clubhouse, shadows shifting as voices grew louder. The front door swung open, and a man emerged, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with a commanding presence. His leather jacket was adorned with patches and spikes, marking him as the leader. I'm Axel, the man said, his voice deep and steady. To what do we owe the honor of your visit? Mr. Evans? Mark stepped forward, meeting Axel's gaze without flinching. I'm here to talk about two of your men, Hank and Duke. They've crossed a line. And I need to make sure it doesn't happen again. Axel's expression darkened. And he gestured for Mark to enter. Come inside. Let's talk. Mark followed him into the clubhouse. The weight of the evening pressing heavily on his shoulders. This was his chance to put an end to the night's troubles. And he intended to seize it. Mark stepped into the Steel Wolves clubhouse. His senses heightened as he took in the scene. The main room was expansive, with leather couches scattered around and a large bar occupying one corner. The walls were adorned with motorcycle paraphernalia, photographs of past rides, and the snarling wolf insignia that seemed to represent the group's identity. A murmur rippled through the crowd of leather-clad men as they noticed him, their conversations faltering into hushed whispers. Axel gestured toward a couch near the bar, his imposing figure radiating authority. Take a seat, he said, his voice calm but firm. Let's get this sorted. Mark sat down, his posture relaxed yet deliberate, projecting confidence without arrogance. He wasn't here to start a fight but to make his point clear. Axel remained standing, his arms crossed as he addressed the room. Where are Hank and Duke? He barked. The crowd parted slightly as the two bikers appeared from the back of the room. Hank's usual smirk faltered when he saw Mark, and Duke's expression hardened, his discomfort poorly masked by bravado. What's this about? Hank muttered, his eyes darting between Axel and Mark. Axel fixed them with a glare. That's what we're about to find out. He turned back to Mark. Tell me what happened. Mark's voice was steady as he recounted the events of the evening. He spoke clearly and without embellishment, describing how Hank and Duke had mocked and harassed him and Rachel, threatened their dogs, and intimidated an elderly woman at the gas station. The room grew quiet as he spoke, the weight of his words settling over the crowd. By the time he finished, all eyes were on Axel. Axel's expression darkened. Is this true? He demanded, his gaze like a laser cutting through Hank and Duke. Hank shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado crumbling. We were just messing around, he muttered. Didn't mean anything by it. Duke tried to back him up, though his tone was less convincing. Yeah, just some harmless fun. No one got hurt. Axel's jaw tightened, and he took a step closer to them. You think threatening families and pets is harmless fun? You think dragging our club's name through the mud is a joke? His voice was low and menacing, each word laced with fury. The other members of the Steel Wolves watched silently, their expressions a mix of disapproval and unease. It was clear that Axel's anger carried weight among them, and no one dared interrupt. Mark remained calm, watching the interaction with measured patience. This wasn't just about him or his family anymore, it was about the values this group claimed to uphold. Axel's reaction was telling, and Mark saw an opportunity to resolve things without further escalation. Axel turned back to Mark, his tone apologetic but firm. Let me make this clear, what these two did doesn't represent us. We have a code here: respect, integrity, and loyalty. They've violated that. He turned back to Hank and Duke, his voice dropping to a growl. Hand over your patches. You're out. The room erupted in murmurs as the two bikers exchanged panicked looks. Come on, Axel. Hank protested. You can't be serious. Axel's glare silenced him. I'm dead serious. You're done. You want to act like fools? Do it on your own time. You don't wear our colors. Reluctantly, Hank and Duke removed their patches, the shame evident on their faces. Axel took the insignias from them and gestured toward the door. Get out. As the two men slinked out of the clubhouse, Axel turned back to Mark. I'm sorry for what they put you and your family through. That's not what this club stands for. Mark nodded, his expression softening. I appreciate that. It's clear you're trying to uphold a standard here. Axel extended a hand, his demeanor earnest. If there's anything else we can do to make this right, let me know. Mark shook his hand firmly. Just make sure this doesn't happen again. The tension in the room began to dissipate, replaced by a cautious camaraderie. Several members approached Mark, expressing their admiration for his movies and apologizing for the behavior of their former brothers. Axel, meanwhile, offered an unexpected gesture of goodwill. "We're hosting a community event next month," he said. "It's centered around pets, agility courses, adoption drives, the works. You and your family are welcome to join. Bring those dachshunds of yours. They've got more fight in them than most people I know." Mark allowed a small smile. "We'll think about it." As he left the clubhouse and stepped into the cool night air, Mark felt a sense of closure. The evening had started with tension and fear, but it ended with understanding and accountability. Walking home, Mark thought about Rachel, Daisy, and Max waiting for him. He felt lighter, knowing he had done everything he could to protect them. And as the lights of his house came into view, he knew one thing for sure: family was worth every fight, every risk, and every step forward. As Mark stepped through the front door, he was greeted by the wagging tails of Daisy and Max and the relieved smile of Rachel. The tension of the evening had finally lifted, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and peace. Mark wrapped his arms around Rachel, whispering, "It's over. They won't bother us again." Rachel nodded, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for protecting us. For always being our rock."